Welcome to the Theological Lens, where our goal is to see the world, our daily walks, and our worship transformed by the truth of Jesus Christ. Our content is saturated with Scripture, overflowing with faith, and rooted in the good news of the cross. Each episode will proclaim the name of the Lord, calling us to submit to His ways and live lives that glorify Him. With hearts full of thankfulness, we'll explore how Jesus shapes everything, our decisions, our worldview, and our worship, always pointing back to the hope and transformation found in Him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Theological Lens. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. My name is Dr. Buchanan, and today we are going to dive into a topic that hits at the intersection of a lot of different topics. I think there's some theology in there, there's some child development in there, there's certainly some educational psychology and maybe some educational reform in the middle of this, and hopefully some cultural discernment. So I've done a couple episodes in the last little bit of a series entitled The Kids Are Not Okay. And after last week's episode, I was talking to a colleague, somebody who works within a school system, and we were talking about some of the challenges she was facing. I went off on maybe a little bit of a rant, and she stopped and she said, "Oh my goodness, would you please do a podcast episode on that?" And I thought, oh, okay, yep, I can do this. So if you want to blame anybody, you're going to have to blame this one on Rachel. And I want to acknowledge up front that there are probably going to be some people who disagree with me or say, but it's not like that where I am. And please, understand, I'm not here to throw stones at individuals working within the system. My question is about the system. So today we are going to turn our theological lens on one of the most probably pervasive yet questioned features of Western civilization. And that is within the educational system, we have a near constant requirement that children remain seated in structured and sometimes very passive activities for a significant to maybe even the majority of their school day, sometimes up to 6 hours of their day, with only brief, tightly structured opportunities for serious levels of activity. So before we begin, I need you to hear me on this one. I have a deep-seated appreciation for teachers, for people working within our school system who are doing their absolute best. And I am not throwing stones at them. They are laboring within constraints that they did not design. And the problem is not them. The problem is our model. So if you are a teacher, hear me say this. I know that you are doing your best, and I know that you're probably incorporating a lot of the things that desperately need to be incorporated. It is the bigger systemic model that I really want to take some issue with today. So the industrial age school model, this early onset school model, has developed an accumulated inertia. And that inertia is bureaucratic, it's cultural, it's legal even, it's logistical. This way of moving within the school system squelches. Unfortunately, I think it really squelches innovation, leaves very little room for it, and often keeps children locked into the way things have always been. So today we're going to examine what research actually says about long hours of forced sitting, about passive learning, and about highly structured school days, and then how this might clash with God's design and even God's revealed word, what He teaches us about human beings, especially about children. And then I want to talk about alternative educational models and some of the promise that they show for us being able to address some aspects of these challenges. And they would require a massive reboot in the United States, but they are worth some examination and consideration of how they can be incorporated. So let's dive in. Now, if we're going to understand where we're at, we have to kind of understand how we got to this place. So we need to know the story behind our westernized model of education. And it actually comes out of the Industrial Revolution. And as that modern schooling emerged out of it, it was very deliberately sort of designed to mimic things that were done within factory environments. Bells indicated when you were supposed to move, and students worked in rows, and efficiency was prioritized. And obedience and uniformity were kind of key outcomes that they were looking to measure. And movement and creativity were considered very disruptive to the system. So the model that emerged was something that definitely rewarded quiet compliance, not necessarily curiosity. And it was structured around what was good for a large group of students and not what would meet individual student needs. And that's very much part of the challenge. Then came the rise of standardization. And as national testing frameworks got stronger and stronger, schooling became even more desk bound because you needed more instructional time to make sure the students were going to be ready for those assessments. Passive instruction was seen not as a bug, but as a feature. This is how we get to that better testing place. And it made a system that was built around measurable outputs. And those systems tend to favor things like lecturing and worksheets and reduced physical movement and reduced creative exploration because creativity just isn't testable. So recent pooled analyses across dozens of countries, so this is not just a U.S. problem, confirm that school-age children accumulate only about 18 to 27 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity during their school day, while spending somewhere around 260 to 270 on average minutes in more sedentary behavior during their school day. So even if the child is highly active after school, these unbroken stretches of sitting actually create both health risks physiologically and also some cognitive risks as well. A growing body of research, including some systemic reviews from 2021 to 2025, this was really fresh stuff, links prolonged classroom sitting to measurable declines in these areas in attention, executive functioning, in memory, and in academic performance. So this structure is for sure not child-centered. It is instead measurement-centered. And the result is really a system that no longer really fits children. And we can think about it like this. Okay, so in the past 100 years, the truth is that children have changed and their activity levels outside of school have changed and their family environments have changed. And the entire field of educational research has changed. We've discovered rich things about children's learning. Culture has changed. But unfortunately, in the last 100 years, we haven't seen significant changes in our educational models. And there seems to be a widening gap between the goals of the educational system that we have and also the outcomes that they are producing within the system. Because honestly, if you look at the research on student success in the United States from our educational systems, it is really discouraging. We could look at what they refer to as the nation's report card. It's a test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And that is administered primarily in public schools. And in that, student proficiency in reading and math remains very low. And we have seen either stagnation or lowered numbers, declines in our success rates. So I want to point to some things from the 2024 outcomes, and I want to get lost in statistics here, but there's some valuable things to consider here. We are having significant struggles being at a proficient level from grade 4, grade 8, and even grade 12. Here's the numbers for grade 12. So these are our graduates, and it measures that about 35% of our graduates, a little over a third of our graduates, are at a proficient or higher reading level, a third. And 32% of seniors are below basic reading levels. A third of them are below basic reading levels in their senior year. That's terrifying. And math is also concerning because only 22% of seniors are at or above the proficient level in math, and 45% of seniors are below the basic level in math. Oh no. And if we compare ourselves internationally with some other countries, we can go to what's called the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA. The latest cycle in 2022, they test 15-year-olds, and again, mostly in public schools. And it places the United States somewhere around average-ish in reading, but it places us below average, in some places significantly below average, in math and in science. So that's of a pretty significant concern. U.S. math scores dropped 13 points from 2018 to 2024. And the U.S. is so far behind countries like Singapore and Japan and South Korea, who are like 70 to 110 points ahead of us in math. And it's really notable that we spend like 50% more per student than these other countries do. Just to give you a point of comparison, in the United States, across 10 years of education, we average around $148,000 per student invested in those 10 years. And in Japan, they are spending around $100,000 per student across those 10 years. So that's a significantly lower amount of investment. And just so you're aware, one of the things that drives U.S. spending in regards to education is a significant problem with unfunded pensions for teachers and other school employees. Districts promise to teachers pensions, but often they didn't bother to fund them. And so when teachers retire, then the money to meet the promises that were made to those teachers has to come from the current year's educational spending. So recent 2025 analyses confirm that this is a significant ongoing pressure, and employee benefits, including these unfunded pensions, have risen about 81% when in inflation adjusted dollars since 2002. So the last 24 years those costs have really driven way up, and that is consuming a lot of the current money that's going towards education because they didn't bother to fund the pensions. And this money that's being siphoned out of our system is estimated to be somewhere between $50 to $70 billion a year. This is a big, big thing. And it's one of those reasons that teachers' unions fight so hard against school choice, because if they lose current public school students, then they lose the funding for those students. They lose the income that the educational system needs to support the pension obligations that were never planned for in the budget. And that's just really kind of heartbreaking. And please do know, like, school choice is incredibly popular with parents. Research from multiple organizations have suggested that parent support for school choice is somewhere between 70 and 80%. That's incredibly high. And Texas, in fact, I just saw this news. Texas just rolled out a school choice voucher that could be used to either send your child to a private school, or you could even get some money if you want to do homeschooling. It's some money that would support your homeschooling. And they expected that somewhere between 80 to 100,000 students would apply for this school choice voucher. And as of last week, more than 200,000 had applied. That's more than double what they anticipated. They did not realize it would be so wildly popular. And it is really notable that they think that there are still many, many more applications to come. So I think all of this kind of supports the fact that our current educational models are just not ideal. And families know it intuitively, but there's also a lot of research that backs this up. So I want to focus in on some research that talks about this forced sitting and how that affects learning, because developmental science, cognitive psychology, educational research, all of that have been reporting very concerning data with like increasing urgency. Please, somebody listen, because this is very important. And one of the things that they are emphasizing is that movement is not optional for children. Children's bodies and their brains are made for movement, and research consistently shows physical movement increases blood flow to the brain, and that blood flow to the brain enhances their ability to concentrate. Motor activity actually advances. It supports vocabulary and memory and executive functioning. But sedentary behavior is correlated with increased anxiety and behavioral issues and reduced focus. So children don't move because they're undisciplined. They move because they're children and they're supposed to move. It's just that often when they do move too much, then they're perceived to be undisciplined. So and part of the problem is that moving children distract other children. And if you're trying to maintain a large classroom, which so many teachers have classrooms that are way too large, you cannot allow students to distract other students. So there's just this push to keep students stuck in chairs so they're not distracting others. Number two, research shows us repeatedly that attention spans are shorter than often school structures assume that they are. So studies are consistently demonstrating that most children, especially those under the age of 14, cannot maintain focused attention for long stretches of passive interaction, especially passive listening. So the more passive the activity, the shorter the sustainable attention span. But many classrooms ask children to sustain large blocks of time just listening to a teacher or listening to other students read. They often don't have either the room or the mechanisms for a lot of movement. And then there's minimal hands-on engagement within a lot of those classrooms. So this mismatch creates a lot of frustration for students and a lot of disciplinary problems for teachers when you have students who are acting out of their frustration. I think what is especially true is that sedentary learning contributes to some behavioral mislabeling, because when children cannot sit still, as is developmentally normal, then they're often like sent out of class, or they're given behavior charts, or they're referred for psychological evaluation. I have heard from several parents that when their children, and almost all of them were boys, were in elementary school, some teacher pulled them aside and said, you need to have your child evaluated because I believe your child needs ADHD medication. And I really do believe that, well, it's very possible that some of those teachers were very well intentioned. I think in some of those cases, the teacher was more concerned about classroom convenience than necessarily what was individually good for that child. So these students can get labeled as oppositional or inattentive. And sometimes the consequences for this misbehavior have included removing active playtime as a consequence. Like, this is active playtime that the child desperately needs. That is so counterproductive. Discipline should never include removing of recess or active time, because that child needs that active time. So many students, unfortunately, I believe, are punished not for disobedience, but for biological design, because they need to get that activity out. Other research emphasizes that reduced play correlates with rising childhood mental health difficulties. And this decline in childhood play, especially unstructured outdoor play, tracks really closely with rising anxiety and depression rates. Now, those are correlational studies. They do not prove cause and effect, but they do allow for prediction. And in that, we can just recognize that recess is certainly not enough, and unfortunately in many schools it's shrinking for a variety of different reasons. So the research seems to be beating a very clear and consistent drum. This message is that children are paying the price for adult convenience. And that price is like emotional and mental health, like anxiety and stress and burnout and disengagement. I can't even believe that I'm using the terms burnout and disengagement about children. Like, when we have children who are stressed and burnt out by school, we have got to recognize that something is very, very wrong. And ironically, research shows that children learn better when they move frequently, when they get to engage in hands-on activity, when they collaborate in peer activities, when they participate in active, inquiry-driven tasks. So unfortunately, when they don't have that, it really can contribute to a loss of the love for learning. And if we're going to think about this issue, from a scripture-based lens, or if we're going to think about it theologically, then we have to consider what a biblical anthropology tells us about God's design. God's design of humans is that we are whole, integrated beings. Children are not brains on sticks. Their bodies and their spirits matter. They are embodied souls. And scripture over and over consistently portrays learning that happens in a bunch of different kinds of ways. Often it's active and relational and embodied. And if we can get back to those kind of models, I think we'll end up in better places. So just I want to remind you of, for instance, in Deuteronomy 6, when those parents are told they need to impress some things on their children, it says this: these commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk around along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your forehead. And this isn't just about repetition. It is about walking and rising up and lying down. It is learning that is tied to activity and that is given a context. That's so valuable. Scripture also gives us illustrations of hands-on apprenticeships where people are learning as they do. And you have lots of examples in Scripture of dialogues that are based on physical experiences. As you are experiencing this physically, let's reason together about what it is and what we're learning. There's so much in Scripture about exploration and imitation. And certainly, there's also a place for lecture and that's in the Bible too, and maybe most notably in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. But the biblical picture shows us humans who learn in a lot of different ways. And children deserve better than a limited modality for their learning because they are designed for curiosity. And God's creative design of children should teach us so much. They learn through touch and they learn through, I can remember going into stores with my kids and I would be saying to them, look with your eyes and not with your hands, because they wanted to touch everything. And they learn through curiosity and they learn through trial and error. And they learn through wonder and they learn through exploration. And unfortunately, these very kinds of things this lightning in the bottle is very difficult to capture in high class sized systems. And sometimes our tightly controlled curriculums are forcing students to learn a prescribed content and have little room for them to explore their own interests, their own fascinations. So I think if we think about this topic, then a good stewardship of children and their learning is going to require that we think maybe differently about care versus convenience. Because biblically speaking, adult stewardship demands shaping environments that fit children's God-given design and not reshaping children to try to fit institutional convenience. If our schools systematically suppress the design that God has built into children, then Christians have to at least question the model. And I will add, I am absolutely willing to level the same criticisms at Christian schools where that's appropriate as well. So this isn't something that just public schools wrestle with. I think private schools, Christian schools wrestle with this as well and need to find a broader creativity within it. So the good news is there are some models that point to a better way. And I really want to applaud some of the things that are maybe some of them are outside the public school models, but some of them are things that they're trying to incorporate into public school systems. So you might even be familiar, you might have seen some of these at work in some of our public school environments. And I would applaud that as the day is long, all the time. I will applaud. Let's incorporate these things. So the first one I want to mention is outdoor schools, or sometimes referred to as forest schools. And this is not new because it goes back to the 1950s in Scandinavia, where they would take these kindergartners and these early elementary school students out into the forest for their schooling. And it emphasized learning through play and exploration in these natural outdoor settings, rather than in traditional kinds of classrooms. And that trend, by the way, is surging globally right now. It seems like there was some inertia that was created from the 2019 global pandemic, and screen time concerns and some youth mental health challenges are inspiring people to go back to this topic of outdoor schools and what benefit they might have for us. And these programs emphasize constant movement, nature-based exploration, problem solving, and risk-managed adventurous play. And what they have found from these outdoor schools is some really good benefits: boosted physical health, emotional resilience, social skills, creativity, even environmental stewardship. And as awareness grows, more conventional schools are trying to incorporate outdoor sessions where they can. The challenge is always in accomplishing it, and that's really hard in our environments. But this is a good shift. We want this to shift more towards holistic, nature-based education. Is great. That's good for well-rounded development. So I applaud what they're trying to accomplish it, and I am quite sure that at least two of my children would have loved something like forest schooling or outdoor schooling. And then there is a growing interest in Montessori models, or even the Reggio Emilia approaches to education that came out of Italy. These models are very child guided, so that allows the children to really pursue things that interest them in significant kinds of ways. They're very hands on, they're very movement heavy, and they are developmentally aligned. What we're finding is that students are generally demonstrating stronger executive functioning and sustained engagement in those kinds of models. And then there's expeditionary learning, sometimes referred to as EL education. And this is something that they're really working to build into public school environments more and more, both district level and charter schools. And it uses an instructional model that is built around some challenging interdisciplinary real world learning expeditions. And these schools are integrating these project-based learning activities, fieldwork, service learning, and even collaborative problem solving for real world issues. So these learning expeditions are long-term inquiry-driven projects that connect academic skills, academic standards, to authentic community issues. And they also push character development in this model. And I certainly love that, with a strong emphasis on responsibility and collaboration and perseverance. Those are really great life skills right there. And there's a very active pedagogy. They are hands-on projects, they're student-led inquiries, and they get a regular critique and revision through the teacher facilitators for them. And then they end with some performance-based assessments that might look like a capstone project, an exhibition, a portfolio. Those things I think are really great skill sets as well. And I'm glad that they're incorporating EL education into some of our public school environments. We need more and more of that. It's very much known for high student engagement, strong school cultures, and rigorous applied learning, all good things. And then we're seeing more and more micro schools and hybrid model kinds of schools. And these are smaller learning communities. They have much smaller class sizes. They allow for more individualized pacing to the education, more movement within the school day, shorter seated intervals, stronger relationships. Those are good trends as well. And as homeschooling has kind of gotten it's hit stride recently, because post-pandemic, the growth in homeschooling has been really significant. What has emerged out of that are some homeschool co-ops, or sometimes they refer to them as learning pods. And they function with some variations. They function with flexible schedules. They function with outdoor time, often low student to adult ratios involved in those little learning pods, and some integrated experiential learning that is often part of this. And where all of these alternatives are not necessarily perfect, what they do demonstrate is a pattern. When movement is increasing and this activity level is increasing, we are seeing learning outcomes improve. And when curiosity increases, then behavior improves. And when rigidity decreases, then engagement improves. And those would be incredible outcomes for us. So how do we get to that place from where we are now? Well, part of the challenge that we have, remember I started with a warning that we are where we are because of inertia, because we just keep moving kind of in the direction that we have been moving. And it's very difficult to stop that forward progress and reorient it in different directions. because I want you to understand why these obstacles are so significant. If we were going to implement these models across the United States public schooling system, here's some of the systemic change that would be necessary. We would need to redesign buildings. We would need to massively reduce class sizes. We would need to revamp how we do student assessment. We would need to rewrite state regulations. We would need to rethink liability laws. We would have to shift cultural expectations. We would have to support innovation with the resources that are necessary to help them accomplish it. And we would need to retrain some teachers. But I think the teachers are in on this stuff. I think the teachers see it and long for it. And they're just often too chained by all of these other conventions. So it would absolutely be a massive reboot. But I really think the cost of doing nothing is higher. So let me close here. And I want to say this. Yep, I really do believe in regards to our current educational models in the West, that children are not okay. Not because teachers fail them, but because a model that is designed for factories cannot meet the needs of embodied, curious, image-bearing children. The research is clear. The theology, I think, is clear. The consequences are clear. And there are alternatives. There are options that we could incorporate more and more. So the remaining question really is whether or not we, the adults, the church, the policymakers, the parents, are willing to acknowledge that the model is broken and begin imagining something that is better, and then putting in the work to make that something better happen. Or are we going to continue to fail students for the sake of our adults' convenience? Children deserve environments that align with how God designed them, and that these environments should be active and engaged and relational and curious and full of life. And if we want the kids to be okay, then we can't keep forcing them into a model that never truly fit them in the first place. Curiosity is fragile. Children are born with it, but systems can extinguish that curiosity. And when education becomes a grind, then children lose the spark that God placed within them. So thank you for joining me on this episode of The Theological Lens. You might not agree, and I would actually love to have a debate below. So if you agree, if you disagree, if you think I'm out of my mind, if you think I'm missing the whole point, if your school is doing some better things, I want to hear it. So I would love to hear you in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, would you share it with a teacher, a parent, or a policymaker who needs some encouragement to know that alternatives are possible? And until next time, grace and peace to you.
If you enjoyed what you just heard, we invite you to like the episode and, if possible, leave a positive review. If you know someone who could benefit from this content, please share it on your social media. We also ask that you subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. We are so glad that you chose to be with us today. We hope that you will join us again next week on The Theological Lens.